They said he was nobody, a boy leaving the system with nothing but a cheap bag and the clothes on his back. They were wrong. What he discovered in his aunt's forgotten house wasn't just a fortune. It was a legacy that would force him to become the man he was always meant to be. If you've ever felt like the world has counted you out, stick around. This story is for you. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button because that's what we're all about here. The hinges on the great oak doors of the St. Jude's Home for Boys groaned like a dying man taking his last breath. For me, it was the opposite. It was my first breath. 18 years I'd spent inside those walls, and the sound I'd dreamed of most was the sound of those doors closing behind me for good. Mrs. Gable, the director, stood on the top step, her arms crossed, her face a familiar mask of thin-lipped disapproval. She held a thin manila envelope. "Leo," she said, her voice as crisp and starched as her blouse. "This is it, your final paperwork and the $87.52 the state allots for your transition." She said transition like it was a disease. Maybe it was. From the structured misery of this place to the unstructured misery of the world outside. The other boys, the ones who weren't aging out for another year or two, watched from the windows. Some with envy, some with a pity that felt worse than scorn. A couple of them, the ones who saw weakness as a target, were smirking. "Look at him," I heard one of them, Mark, mutter. "Thinks he's a real man now. He'll be back in a week, begging for a meal." The laughter was quiet, but it echoed in the cavernous space of my own emptiness. I didn't turn around, I just took the envelope. The paper felt flimsy, insignificant. $87, a decade of my life, distilled into less than $100. I had one bag, a worn-out canvas duffel containing 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book a kind volunteer had given me years ago, and a photograph of a woman I'd been told was my mother. She was young in the photo, smiling, but her eyes held a sadness I felt I knew intimately. I never knew my father. My mother had died when I was 6, and her only living relative, an aunt I'd never met named Sarah, had apparently been unable or unwilling to take me in. That was the story I was given anyway, a short, neat, tidy explanation for a lifetime of abandonment. I stuffed the envelope into the pocket of my thin jacket and looked up at the gray, unforgiving sky. It was October, and the air had the sharp bite of coming winter. It felt appropriate. "Good luck, Leo," Mrs. Gable said, the words hollow and automatic. She didn't mean it. To her, I was just another file to be moved from the active cabinet to the archives. Another problem solved. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I walked down the stone steps, each one a countdown to a freedom that felt more like a cliff edge. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, the fear might have paralyzed me right there on the pavement. I walked for what felt like hours, the duffel bag strap digging into my shoulder. The city was a chaotic symphony of sounds I wasn't used to. Car horns, sirens, the roar of 1,000 conversations I wasn't a part of. Every person who passed me on the street looked like they had somewhere to be, a purpose. I was just adrift, a ghost haunting the daylight. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Find the cheapest motel I could, make the $87 last as long as possible, and find a job. Any job. Washing dishes, sweeping floors, anything. It was a fragile thread of a plan, and it was already starting to unravel in the face of the city's overwhelming indifference. I found a small diner and ordered a cup of coffee, mostly for the warmth and the excuse to sit down for a while. I nursed it for an hour, watching the world go by outside the greasy window. The manila envelope sat on the table, a flimsy symbol of my entire net worth. I finally opened it. Inside was the cash, a copy of my birth certificate, my social security card, and another, smaller envelope. It was a business envelope, crisp and white, made of thick, expensive paper that felt alien compared to the cheap government stationery. The return address was for a law firm, Davies and Associates, attorneys at law. My name was typed neatly on the front. My heart gave a little thump. Lawyers meant trouble. In my world, that was a universal truth. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. The letter inside was short and formal. It informed me that a Ms. Sarah Jenkins, my maternal aunt, had passed away 6 months ago. My stomach twisted. The aunt who hadn't wanted me. I felt a strange, hollow pang of grief for a person I'd never known, for a connection that had never been. The letter went on to state that she had named me, Leo Vance, as the sole beneficiary of her estate. The word estate sounded grand, important. I pictured a mansion, a sprawling garden, but the letter quickly clarified. The estate consisted of a single property, a small farmhouse, and 5 acres of land in a place called Havenwood, a rural town I'd never heard of. There was no mention of money, just a house and land. The letter concluded by instructing me to contact a Mr. Alastair Davies at my earliest convenience to arrange for the transfer of the deed and the keys. It also mentioned that a bus ticket to Havenwood had been enclosed, prepaid by the firm. I looked back in the envelope. Sure enough, there was a one-way bus ticket for the next morning. My mind was reeling. A house. I had a house. It was probably a shack, a ruin, but it was a roof. It was something more than a cheap motel room. It was a destination. The smirks of the boys at the home flashed in my mind, the pity in their eyes. They thought I had nothing, and an hour ago they were right. But now I had a piece of land, a place to stand that was mine. It was a fragile, terrifying hope, but it was hope nonetheless. That night I stayed in a motel that smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I lay on the lumpy bed and stared at the ceiling, the lawyer's letter clutched in my hand. Who was Sarah Jenkins? Why would a woman who didn't want me as a child leave me everything she had when she died? The questions circled in my mind, a flock of restless birds with no place to land. Was it guilt, a final half-hearted apology from beyond the grave? Or was there something more to the story I'd been told? The next morning, I was at the bus station before the sun came up. The city was still asleep, quiet and gray in the pre-dawn light. The bus hissed and groaned, a mechanical beast waiting to swallow me up and spit me out somewhere new. I found my seat by the window and watched the city lights give way to the sprawling suburbs and then to the endless rolling fields of the countryside. The journey took 6 hours. 6 hours of watching the world blur past, of feeling the gentle rocking of the bus lull me into a state between waking and sleep. I thought about my aunt. I tried to picture her, to imagine her life in this town of Havenwood. I tried to feel something for her, but all I could muster was a confusing mix of resentment and a strange, desperate gratitude. When the bus finally pulled into Havenwood, it was less a station and more a simple stop on the side of a quiet main street. The town was small, picturesque in a faded, forgotten sort of way. Old brick buildings with faded paint, a single traffic light, a handful of people milling about who all seemed to know each other. The air was different here. It was clean, crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. It felt ancient and calm. According to the directions in the letter, the law office was just a short walk from the bus stop. Davies and Associates was on the 2nd floor of one of the old brick buildings above a hardware store. The stairs creaked under my feet, and the door to the office had a frosted glass panel with the firm's name in elegant old-fashioned gold leaf. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The man who greeted me was older, maybe in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a fringe of white hair around a bald head. He wore a tweed jacket and had a gentle, calm demeanor. This was Alastair Davies. "Mr. Vance," he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm and warm. "I'm Alastair Davies. I'm glad you made it. Please come in." His office was filled with books, floor-to-ceiling shelves overflowing with thick, leather-bound volumes. It smelled of old paper and lemon polish. It was a comforting space, a safe space. He gestured for me to sit in one of the plush leather chairs opposite his large wooden desk. "I was your aunt's lawyer for nearly 30 years, he began, his voice soft. "She was a remarkable woman, very private, very strong-willed." I just nodded, unsure of what to say. I know this must be a lot to take in, he continued, sensing my apprehension. Sarah, she spoke of you often. It pained her a great deal that she couldn't be in your life. This was not the story I knew. They told me she didn't want me, I said, the words coming out quieter than I intended. Mr. Davies sighed, a deep, weary sound. He leaned forward, his expression serious. The story is more complicated than that, Leo. I can only tell you what she told me and what she left for you to discover. She believed you needed to learn it for yourself, in your own time, in her own words. He slid a large yellowed envelope across the desk. It was sealed with a wax stamp. On the front, in elegant, looping cursive, was my name. She left you this, he said, along with the deed to the property and the keys. He also handed me a set of old-fashioned skeleton keys on a simple metal ring. The house has been vacant since she passed. It's in a state of some disrepair. She didn't have much in her final years. This confirmed my fears of inheriting a ruin, but still, it was mine. She also left this for you. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small, sturdy-looking cash box. He unlocked it and turned it around. Inside were neat stacks of $20 bills. $2,000, Mr. Davies said, for immediate expenses to get you started. It was all the liquid cash she had on hand. My eyes widened. $2,000 felt like $1 million. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of, he added gently. I stared at the money, then at the letter, then at the keys. My entire world was tilting on its axis. Nothing made sense. A woman who abandoned me left me a house, a small fortune, and a letter. Mr. Davies gave me directions to the property. It was a couple of miles outside of town. He offered to call me a cab, but I told him I'd rather walk. I needed the time to think, to let the cold air clear my head. With the cash box in my duffel bag and the mysterious letter in my jacket pocket, I walked out of the office and into the next chapter of my life. The walk to my aunt's property was a journey through a landscape I'd only ever seen in pictures. The road wound through dense forests of pine and oak, past fields lying fallow for the winter. The silence was profound, broken only by the cawing of crows and the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was a lonely sound, but it wasn't an empty one. After about 40 minutes, I saw it. A rusted mailbox half hidden by overgrown weeds, the name Jenkins barely visible under the grime. A long, unpaved driveway snaked up a gentle hill, disappearing into a stand of trees. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel. The trees opened up into a clearing, and there it was. The house was a simple 2-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling and grayed by years of weather. The porch sagged in one corner, and several shingles were missing from the roof. A large, dilapidated barn stood off to one side, its doors hanging crookedly on their hinges. The whole place looked weary, tired, like it was slowly surrendering to the relentless creep of nature. It was exactly the ruin I had expected, and yet standing there I felt a powerful, inexplicable sense of coming home. It was the first place in the world that was mine. I found the right key and slid it into the lock of the front door. It turned with a rusty shriek. The door swung inward, releasing a wave of stale, musty air. The inside of the house was dark, the windows thick with dust. All the furniture was covered in white sheets, making the room look like a graveyard of ghosts. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was cold, colder than it was outside. I could see my breath. I walked through the downstairs rooms, a living room with a large stone fireplace, a small kitchen with old yellowed appliances, a dining room with a heavy wooden table still covered by a sheet. Everything was neat, orderly, but coated in a thick layer of dust. It was a house that had been left, not abandoned. There was a difference. I went upstairs. There were 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. In one of the bedrooms, the sheets had been pulled off the furniture. This must have been hers. There was a simple iron bed frame, a small wooden desk, and a rocking chair by the window. It was a sparse, simple room. On the desk, a layer of dust had been disturbed. There was a clean rectangle where something had been sitting. I looked back at the large envelope Mr. Davies had given me. It was the same size. She had left it for me right here on this desk. I sat down in the rocking chair, its wood creaking in protest. The window looked out over the fields and the distant line of trees. It was a peaceful view. For a long time I just sat there, holding the envelope, the last will and testament of a stranger who was also my family. Finally, I broke the wax seal. Inside were several pages of thick, cream-colored paper, filled with the same elegant, looping handwriting that was on the envelope. I began to read. "My dearest Leo," it started. My breath hitched. No one had ever called me their dearest. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally come home. I know you must have so many questions, and I know you must hate me. I don't blame you. The story they told you that I didn't want you is the story I needed them to tell. It was a lie, a terrible, necessary lie." The words swam before my eyes. I had to stop and take a deep, shaky breath before I could continue. "When your mother, my sweet sister, passed away, I was ready to take you in. I was all you had left, and you were all I had left. I loved you before I even met you because you were a part of her, but my life at that time was complicated, dangerous. There were people, powerful people, who wanted this land. They wanted to tear down this home, plow over these fields, and build luxury vacation homes. They made me an offer, a ridiculously low one, and I refused. This land has been in our family for 100 years. It is more than just dirt and wood. It is our history." The letter continued, detailing a campaign of intimidation and harassment by a development corporation called Stonebridge Holdings. They had sued her over property lines, reported her for false code violations, and even tried to have her declared mentally incompetent. They were trying to bleed her dry, to break her spirit so she would be forced to sell. I couldn't bring a child into that world, Leo. I couldn't subject you to that fight, to that fear. They were watching me, my finances, my every move. If I had taken you in, they would have used you against me. They would have reported me to social services, claiming I was an unfit guardian living in a hazardous environment. And they would have won. You would have been taken from me anyway, and I would have put you in even greater danger. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I let you go. I let you go into the system where I knew you would at least be safe, fed, and sheltered. I told them I was unable to care for you. I let the world think I was a monster because it was the only way to protect you." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. They dripped onto the page, smudging the ink. All those years of feeling unwanted, of believing I was a burden my own family had cast aside. It had all been a lie, a shield. She hadn't abandoned me. She had sacrificed her reputation, her connection to me, to keep me safe. It was a love so fierce and so painful I could barely comprehend it. The letter wasn't over. "I never stopped watching over you," she wrote. "Alistair kept me informed. I have every one of your report cards, every school picture. I know you love to read. I know you are quiet but strong. I am so proud of the man you are becoming. I spent the last 12 years of my life fighting Stonebridge, and I also spent it saving. Every penny I could scrape together, I put aside for you. But I couldn't put it in a bank. Stonebridge had connections. They could have frozen my assets with another lawsuit. So I hid it, here in this house. This house has kept our family's secrets for a long time, and now it is keeping one for you." My heart was pounding. Hidden money? It sounded like something out of a book. "This is your real inheritance, Leo, not this old house or this tired piece of land. It's a choice, a chance. There is enough money hidden here for you to start a new life, anywhere you want. You can take it, disappear, and never think of Havenwood or Stonebridge Holdings again. You owe this place nothing. You owe me nothing. Your only duty is to yourself, to find happiness and peace." The letter ended with one final cryptic instruction. "Your journey begins where our family's story is warmest. Look for the heart of the home, and you will find the first key to your future. Be careful, my boy, and know that I have loved you always. Your Aunt, Sarah. I sat there in the rocking chair, the letter in my lap, as the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty window. The entire foundation of my life, the story of my own abandonment, had been shattered and rebuilt in the space of 10 minutes. I wasn't an unwanted child. I was a protected one. And my protector had left me a final gift, a treasure hunt in a house full of ghosts and secrets. The heart of the home, the fireplace. It had to be the fireplace. I went back downstairs to the living room, my mind buzzing with a strange mixture of grief, gratitude, and a nervous electric energy. The stone fireplace dominated the room. It was huge, built from large, irregular river stones with a thick oak mantelpiece. It was clearly the oldest part of the house, solid and unyielding. The hearth was a single, massive slab of slate. The heart of the home, I whispered to myself, the words feeling foreign and momentous in the silent house. I ran my hands over the cold stones, searching for anything unusual, a loose rock, a hidden seam, a hollow spot. I tapped on each stone, listening for a change in the sound. Nothing. I knelt down and examined the hearthstone. It was smooth and worn from a century of use. It looked completely solid. I spent nearly an hour searching, my initial excitement slowly turning into frustration. Was I wrong? Was it just a metaphor? I sat back on my heels, covered in soot and dust, and looked at the fireplace again. Maybe I was thinking too literally. The heart of the home isn't just the fire, it's the warmth it provides. I looked at the mantelpiece. It was a solid beam of wood, dark with age. I ran my hands along its surface, underneath its edge. And then I felt it, a small, almost imperceptible notch on the underside, right in the center. My fingers fumbled with it, and I felt a tiny wooden latch. I flicked it. With a soft click, a small section of the mantelpiece, no bigger than a brick, popped open. It was a tiny, hidden compartment. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, ornate brass key and another folded letter. This one was shorter. "Clever boy," it read. "I knew you'd find it. Your grandfather built that compartment. He was a man who believed in keeping secrets safe. This key opens the old sea chest at the foot of my bed. And Leo, be prepared. The truth isn't always easy, but it is always necessary. Love, Sarah." I took the key and ran back upstairs, my boots thudding on the wooden steps. At the foot of the iron bed frame was an old, dark wood chest, bound with iron straps. It looked like something a pirate would own. The brass key slid perfectly into the lock. I turned it, and the lock clicked open. I lifted the heavy lid. The chest was filled with old linens and quilts, smelling of lavender and cedar. I dug through them, my hands searching for what? A box? Another envelope? At the very bottom, my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a metal deed box, the kind people used to store important documents before the age of digital everything. It wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside were stacks of money. Not an overwhelming amount, but more than I could have imagined. I counted it quickly. $10,000, mostly in 50s and hundreds. But that wasn't the most important thing in the box. Beneath the money was a thick stack of documents, held together by a rubber band, and another letter. This letter was different. The handwriting was the same, but the tone was angrier, more desperate. "Leo," it began, "this is the ugly part of the story. This is the proof. In this box you will find every threatening letter Stonebridge sent me, every frivolous legal filing, every notice of intent. I want you to read them. I want you to understand what we are up against. They are not just businessmen, Leo. They are predators. They chew up small towns and spit them out, leaving nothing behind but broken communities and empty storefronts. They did it in Willow Creek. They did it in Pine Ridge. And Havenwood is next on their list." I picked up the stack of documents. It was a timeline of harassment. Letters from high-powered lawyers in the city, filled with legal jargon designed to intimidate and confuse. Lawsuit filings for absurd things, a branch from one of her trees supposedly hanging over a neighbor's property line, a neighbor who had sold to Stonebridge a month earlier, a claim that her well was draining the local water table, a petition to have the county rezone her agricultural land for commercial development. It was a relentless, systematic assault. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and she had fought it all alone for over a decade. The letter continued. They offered me $500,000 for this place 5 years ago. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I take it? I could have bought a nice house somewhere else, lived comfortably. I could have brought you to live with me. I thought about it every single day. But it wasn't just about the money, Leo. If I sold, my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, would have been next. And then the Millers. Stonebridge needed my property because it has the only reliable water access for a new development. If I held out, I could protect the whole valley. Selling would have been like accepting blood money. It would have been a betrayal of everything our family stood for. This land taught us to be stubborn, to be resilient. I couldn't let them win. I felt a surge of fierce pride for this woman I'd never met. She wasn't just a victim. She was a warrior. She had stood her ground against an invisible, powerful enemy, all while making sure I was safe from the fallout. The $10,000 in the box was a fortune to me, but now I understood it was just seed money. It was a test. The final lines of the letter confirmed it. This money is yours, a down payment on your new life. But the real prize, the real legacy, is still hidden. If you've read this far and you still want to know the whole truth, then you need to look where a farmer's real wealth is stored. Not in the house, but in the harvest. Find the heart of the barn. I put the letters and the legal documents back in the box. My hands were shaking. This was so much bigger than a simple inheritance. It was a battle, and my aunt had just passed the torch to me. I took the $10,000 and put it in my duffel bag with the initial $2,000. I felt a pang of guilt, like I was robbing her, but her letter had been clear. It was for me. I left the house and walked toward the barn, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. The air was getting colder, and the sky was turning a bruised purple. The barn was even more dilapidated than the house. Its red paint had faded to a pale, dusty pink, and the roof sagged dangerously in the middle. The huge double doors groaned in protest as I forced one of them open just enough to slip through. The inside of the barn was vast and dark, filled with the ghosts of long-gone animals. It smelled of hay, dust, and decay. Light streamed in through cracks in the wooden walls, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. Old, rusted farm equipment lay scattered about like the skeletons of great iron beasts. An old tractor, a plow, a thresher. The heart of the barn, I repeated her words. My first thought was the hayloft, but that felt too obvious. I looked around the cavernous space. What was the most important part of a barn? The foundation that holds it up? The grain silo where the harvest is stored? There was a small attached silo at the back of the barn, a round stone structure. I walked towards it. The door was swollen shut, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it open. The silo was empty, a cylindrical stone room that echoed with every sound. In the center of the dirt floor was a large, flat stone that didn't quite match the others. It was lighter in color, and the dirt around its edges seemed looser. I knelt down and started digging with my bare hands. The dirt was cold and damp. After a few minutes of frantic digging, I had cleared the edges of the stone. There was a rusted iron ring set into one side. I hooked my fingers through it and pulled. It was incredibly heavy. I braced my feet and heaved with all my strength. With a grating, scraping sound, the stone lifted. It was a capstone, covering a hole, a small cellar. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I peered into the darkness. A rickety wooden ladder led down into the gloom. I took out my phone and switched on the flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp white line through the darkness. I climbed down the ladder, my feet landing softly on a packed earth floor. The cellar was small, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet. and in the center of it was a large military-style footlocker. It was heavy, made of dark green metal, with sturdy latches on the front. It wasn't locked. I knelt before it, my hands trembling so much I could barely work the latches. This was it. The end of the hunt. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might find. I lifted the lid. I think there are moments in life that divide your timeline into a before and an after. Seeing what was inside that footlocker was one of those moments for me. My entire reality, my perception of my own life and my future shifted on its axis in the dusty, silent dark of that cellar. Have you ever had a moment like that? A piece of news, a discovery, a conversation that completely changes the game? It's a terrifying feeling, but it's also clarifying. Suddenly, all the small, insignificant worries fall away, and you're left with one huge, life-altering choice. For anyone watching who has been through that, who has had to redefine their entire world overnight, I see you. It's a lonely place to be, but you are not alone in the experience. Let me know in the comments if a single moment ever changed your path, because sharing those stories is how we remind each other that we can survive those shifts. Now, let's get back to that barn. The beam of my phone's flashlight illuminated the contents of the footlocker, and for a solid minute I couldn't breathe. It was full of money, stacks and stacks of cash, bundled neatly with rubber bands, hundreds, 50s, 20s. It was an impossible amount of money. On top of the stacks was one final envelope. The last letter. My hand was shaking as I picked it up. I had to read it. I had to understand. I sat on the cold floor of the cellar and opened it. "My dear Leo," the letter began, the handwriting as steady and elegant as ever. "If you found this, you found your freedom, or your burden. I suppose it all depends on how you look at it. There is $400,000 in this chest. I saved it over 20 years. I sold off small parcels of timber. I leased a back field to a neighboring farmer. I took on odd jobs in town. I lived on almost nothing. Every spare dollar went into this box. It was my secret weapon, my escape plan for you." $400,000. The number didn't seem real. It was a figure from a movie, a dream. It was more money than St. Jude's Home for Boys probably saw in a year. It was enough to change everything. "Leo, I need you to listen to me very carefully," the letter went on, the tone shifting, becoming more urgent. "This money is clean, it's untraceable. You can take it, walk away from Havenwood, and build any life you want. Go to college, travel the world, buy a house on the ocean, disappear. No one would ever find you, and no one would blame you. After the life you've had, you deserve peace. You deserve to be free of this fight. This was always my primary goal, to give you a choice that I never had." I looked from the letter to the stacks of cash. The sheer possibility of it was dizzying. I could leave this dusty cellar, this crumbling house, this town I didn't know, and never look back. I could erase the boy from the orphanage and become someone new, someone defined by his future, not his past. It was a seductive, intoxicating thought, but the letter wasn't finished. "That is one choice," she wrote, "and it is a good one. There is no shame in it, but there is another choice. You could stay. You could use this money to fight. You could hire the best lawyers, not just a small-town attorney like Alistair, but a real litigation team from the city. You could expose what Stonebridge Holdings is doing, not just here, but in all the other small towns they've bled dry. You could use their own tactics against them. You could save this farm. You could save this valley. You could finish the fight that I had to give up." I could feel the weight of her words, the weight of that choice settling onto my shoulders. It felt heavier than the footlocker itself. "I won't lie to you, Leo. The second choice is the harder path. It will be a long, ugly, expensive fight. You might lose. You might spend every last penny of this money and still lose the land. You will be trading a life of peace and anonymity for a life of conflict and stress. So why would you do it? I can't answer that for you. All I can say is that this land is more than just dirt. It's a legacy. It's a place where our family put down roots and held on through droughts, floods, and depressions. It represents a way of life that people like Stonebridge want to erase from the map. They want a world of generic subdivisions and strip malls with no history and no character. Fighting them isn't just about saving 5 acres of land. It's about standing for something. The final paragraph was almost a whisper on the page. I do not ask this of you. It is not a request. It is simply an option, a door I am leaving open. Whatever you choose, I will be proud of you. The money is your inheritance. The fight is just an opportunity. The choice, my dearest Leo, is the only thing that truly matters. It is yours and yours alone. All my love forever, Aunt Sarah. I folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the empty footlocker. I didn't touch the money. I just sat there in the dark, the flashlight beam pointed at the ceiling, and cried. I cried for the boy who grew up believing he was worthless. I cried for the woman who gave up everything to protect him. I cried for the terrible, beautiful, impossible choice she had left me. I closed the footlocker, climbed out of the cellar, and slid the heavy capstone back into place. I walked out of the barn and into the twilight. The sun had set, and the sky was a deep, star-dusted indigo. The air was cold and still. I stood in the yard, looking at the dark silhouette of the house against the sky. It wasn't a ruin to me anymore. It was a fortress. It was a legacy. I could take the money and run. Every rational part of my brain, the part that had been forged in the survival of the fittest world of the orphanage, screamed at me to do it. Take the money, disappear, be safe. The world had never given me a single thing, and now it was offering me a golden ticket. Only a fool would turn it down. But Sarah's words echoed in my head. It's about standing for something. I had never had anything to stand for. My life had been about being invisible, about not making waves, about just getting through the day. I had no roots, no connections, no history until now. This house, this land, this fight. It was the first thing in my life that had ever truly belonged to me. It wasn't just an inheritance of property. It was an inheritance of purpose. I spent the night in the house, not in my aunt's room, but in a sleeping bag I didn't have. So I used the old quilts from the chest on the floor of the living room, in front of the cold fireplace. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to the old house groan and settle around me, the sounds of its history, its memories. I thought about Mark and the other boys laughing at me as I left, the poor orphan with his $87. If they could see me now, the thought brought a bitter smile to my face. I could go back there, I thought. I could drive up in a fancy car wearing expensive clothes. I could flash a $100 bill and prove them all wrong. But the thought felt as hollow as I used to be. Proving them wrong wasn't the point. The point was proving my aunt right. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. The decision had been made, not in a flash of lightning, but in a slow, quiet dawn in my own heart. I knew what I had to do. I made my way back into town, walking the 2 miles with a new sense of purpose in my stride. The town looked different to me now. It wasn't just a random collection of buildings. It was a community under siege. I saw the for sale signs in front of a few other properties on the edge of town, the Stonebridge Holdings logo printed neatly at the bottom. They were like vultures, circling. I walked up the creaking stairs to Mr. Davies' office. He was already there, a cup of steaming coffee in his hand. He looked up as I entered, and his kind eyes widened slightly. He saw something different in my face. "Leo," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I wasn't expecting to see you so soon." "I read the letters," I said, my voice steady. "I found it, all of it." Mr. Davies put his coffee cup down. He leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. A slow smile spread across his face. "She always believed in you," he said softly. "She always said you had a strong heart." "She left me a choice," I said, "to run or to fight." "And?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "I need a good lawyer, Mr. Davies," I said. "A very, very good lawyer. I'm not selling. I'm fighting." Alistair Davies's smile faded, replaced by a look of grave seriousness. He nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. "Sarah told me this might happen," he said, his voice low and steady. "She hoped for it, but she also feared it for you." He stood up and walked over to a large filing cabinet in the corner of his book-lined office. He pulled open a drawer, the metal groaning in the quiet room, and retrieved a thick, worn folder. He placed it on the desk between us. The label on it read simply, "Jenkins, S." "This is my entire file on your aunt's correspondence with Stonebridge Holdings," he said. "It's a decade of my life, and hers. It's full of defeats and small temporary victories. We held them off, Sarah and I. We slowed them down, but we were outgunned. They have a team of corporate lawyers in the city who specialize in this kind of predatory acquisition. They use slap suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation, to silence and bankrupt anyone who stands in their way. It's all perfectly legal and morally bankrupt." He opened the folder. It was overflowing with the same kinds of documents I had found in the deed box, but there were hundreds more. He tapped a letter on the top of the pile. "This is their latest offer, sent a month before Sarah passed. $750,000. Cash. Close in 30 days. My jaw dropped. She had turned down $750,000. The $400,000 in the footlocker was a fortune, but she had willingly sacrificed nearly double that to hold on to her principles. "Why?" I asked, the word barely a whisper. "Because she knew it was never about her farm," Mr. Davies explained, his eyes filled with a weary wisdom. "It was the keystone, the linchpin. Her property has the riparian rights to Miller's Creek. Without control of that water source, their planned golf course and gated community is impossible. If she sold, the rest of the valley would have fallen within a year. She wasn't just protecting her home, Leo. She was protecting Havenwood." He closed the folder. "So when you say you want to fight, you need to understand what you're stepping into. This isn't a courtroom drama on television. It will be slow, expensive, and emotionally draining. They will dig into your past. They will try to paint you as an unstable, opportunistic kid who is trying to extort them. They will try to break you." I thought of my life at St. Jude's, the taunts, the isolation, the constant feeling of being powerless. I had been broken before. I knew what it felt like. But this time was different. This time I had a reason to put myself back together. I had a foundation to stand on. "The money," I said, my voice gaining strength. "The $400,000, it's for the legal fees, isn't it? That's its real purpose." "It's your war chest," he confirmed with a nod. "It's enough to get their attention. It's enough to hire a firm that isn't afraid of them. It's enough to turn their own tactics back on them. We can file countersuits. We can demand discovery on their business practices in other towns. We can drag them into a public fight they don't want." He paused, looking at me intently. "But it's your money, Leo. Once we start down this path, it will go fast. Are you truly prepared to see it all disappear with no guarantee of victory?" I looked out the window at the quiet main street of Havenwood. I saw the hardware store owner sweeping his front step, 2 elderly women chatting on a bench, a young family pushing a stroller. These were the people my aunt had been protecting. This was the community she had sacrificed for. My choice was clear. "Yes," I said, "I am." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Mr. Davies made a call to a specialized environmental and land use law firm in the state capital. He used my aunt's name, and it was clear she had a reputation. We had a meeting. I sat in a sleek, modern conference room, surrounded by lawyers in sharp suits who listened intently as I told my story. I wasn't the orphan, Leo Vance, anymore. I was the representative of the Jenkins estate. I showed them the letters, the proof of harassment. When I told them about the $400,000 legal fund, the entire energy in the room shifted. They saw we were serious. They agreed to take the case. The first step was to formally reject Stonebridge's latest offer and inform them that the estate was not only refusing to sell, but was preparing a countersuit for years of corporate harassment. The letter was sent. A week later, the phone calls started. Not from lawyers, but from a man named Mr. Corbin, a senior acquisitions executive at Stonebridge. He was smooth, charming, and utterly condescending. "Leo, my boy," he said, his voice like honey laced with poison. "Let's not be hasty. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't get tied up in some small-town sentimentality. Your aunt was a difficult woman, but you're a businessman. I can see that. The offer is $750,000, but for you, seeing as you're a reasonable young man, I can go up to $800. Think of what you could do with that money." "It's not for sale," I said, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles were white. The principled stand," he chuckled. "Very noble, but principles don't pay the bills, son. Let me be clear. We are going to acquire that land. The only variable is how much of a headache you decide to be. You can walk away with $800,000, a rich young man, or you can walk away with nothing but legal bills and a piece of useless farmland. The choice is yours." He hung up. The threat was clear. They would crush me, but instead of feeling scared, I felt a cold, hard anger settle in my gut. It was the same anger I had felt as a kid when bullies would corner me, but this time I wasn't powerless. I started working on the house. I couldn't afford contractors, so I did everything myself. I bought books on carpentry, plumbing, and roofing from the local hardware store. I spent my days patching the roof, replacing rotten boards on the porch, and sanding the old wooden floors. The physical labor was grueling, but it was honest. With every nail I hammered, I felt like I was reclaiming something, making the house my own. I was putting down roots, literally and figuratively. The town started to notice. People who had known my aunt would stop by. An old farmer named Henderson, whose property bordered mine, came by one afternoon with a thermos of coffee. "Your aunt was a tough old bird," he said, his face weathered like an old map. "She saved my farm. When Stonebridge started sniffing around, she's the one who told me what to watch out for, who told me not to sign anything without talking to Alistair. This whole valley owes her." Others came by, too. The woman from the local diner brought me a hot casserole. The hardware store owner gave me a discount on supplies. They shared stories about Sarah, her stubbornness, her kindness, her quiet determination. I was learning about her not just from her letters, but from the community she had worked so hard to protect. I wasn't just defending a piece of property anymore. I was defending a home, a town, a legacy of decency against an invading force of greed. The legal battle raged on in the background. Motions were filed, depositions were scheduled. It was a slow, grinding war of attrition, happening in offices and courtrooms far from Havenwood. My legal fund was draining at an alarming rate. Sometimes late at night, sitting alone in the quiet house, doubt would creep in. Corbin's offer of $800,000 would whisper in my ear. I could be on a beach somewhere without a care in the world. Was I a fool for choosing this life of struggle? But then I would look at the photograph of my mother, which I had placed on the mantelpiece, and I would look at the rocking chair where I had first read my aunt's letters, and I knew I was in the right place. One day, a package arrived from my lawyers. It was a discovery file from Stonebridge's internal records, something they had been forced to turn over. It contained their acquisition strategy for Havenwood. It was a cold, calculating document outlining how they would use legal pressure to acquire the Keystone Jenkins property and then roll up the surrounding farms at a significant discount once the water rights were secured. But there was something else in the file, an internal environmental impact assessment. Their own report stated that the proposed golf course would require so much water from Miller's Creek that it would likely cause the wells on neighboring properties, including the town's own municipal well, to run dry during the summer months. They knew their development could create a water crisis for the entire town, and they were planning to do it anyway. They had buried the report. This was it. This was the smoking gun. It wasn't just about harassment anymore. It was about public endangerment. My lawyers said this changed everything. We could get an injunction. We could take this to the press. The fight had just escalated to a whole new level. That night I sat on the newly repaired porch, looking out at the stars. The house was quiet behind me. It wasn't a fancy house. It wasn't a mansion. But it was strong. It had sheltered my family for generations, and now it was sheltering me. I thought about the word inheritance. I used to think it meant money, things you were given. But now I knew that was wrong. A true inheritance isn't something you receive, it's something you are called to protect. My aunt hadn't left me $400,000. She had left me a purpose. She had left me a chance to become a man who stood for something. She had left me a home. The discovery of Stonebridge's environmental report was the turning point. It shifted the battle from a private property dispute into a public interest case. Our legal team immediately filed for an injunction to halt any pre-development work, citing the potential for catastrophic damage to the town's water supply. We also very strategically leaked the report to a well-respected investigative journalist at a major state newspaper. The story broke a week later. The headline was explosive. Corporate developer's secret report reveals plan that could dry up small town. The article laid out the entire story. Stonebridge's history of predatory acquisitions, their campaign of harassment against my aunt, and the damning evidence from their own files that they were willing to sacrifice Havenwood's water supply for their luxury golf course. The story was syndicated. It went viral. Suddenly, our quiet fight was a statewide scandal. The phone in Mr. Davies' office didn't stop ringing. Calls came from the state's Environmental Protection Agency, from the governor's office, from other towns that had been targeted by Stonebridge in the past. It was an avalanche. Stonebridge Holdings, a company that operated in the shadows, was suddenly caught in a very bright, very unflattering spotlight. Mr. Corbin called me again. The smooth, condescending tone was gone. He sounded frantic, furious. "What have you done?" he snarled. "You have no idea who you're messing with, kid. You just made a very big mistake." "No," I said, my voice calm and clear. "My aunt made a promise to this town. I'm just keeping it." I hung up. The power dynamic had shifted. We were no longer on the defensive. The community of Havenwood rallied. A town hall meeting was called, and the small auditorium was packed. People I had only seen in passing were suddenly coming up to me, shaking my hand, thanking me. Old man Henderson stood up and, in his slow, deliberate way, told everyone how Sarah Jenkins had warned him, how she had stood as a firewall for all of them. I was asked to speak. I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of my neighbors. These weren't strangers anymore. They were my community. "I didn't know my aunt," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "But I've gotten to know her through her home, through her letters, and through all of you. She loved this town, and she believed it was worth fighting for. The money she left me, it was meant to be a war chest for this fight. And now this is our fight. All of us." The applause was deafening. It was the first time in my life I had ever felt like I truly belonged somewhere. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt winnable. Stonebridge was forced into a defensive crouch. They were facing multiple state-level investigations and a public relations nightmare. Their stock price began to fall. A few weeks later, my lawyers received a new offer from them. It wasn't for my land. It was an offer to settle. They would drop all claims to my property and all neighboring properties in the Havenwood Valley. They would pay for an independent environmental review and establish a multi-million-dollar fund to ensure the long-term health of the local aquifer. In return, we would drop our lawsuit and agree to a non-disclosure agreement. My legal team was ecstatic. They called it a total victory. "You won, Leo," my lead attorney said over the phone. "You beat them. You saved the town." But I hesitated. A non-disclosure agreement. It meant we couldn't talk about what happened. It meant Stonebridge could just slink away, wait for the news cycle to die down, and do the exact same thing to another small town a few years from now. "No," I told my lawyer, "no deal, not with an NDA. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again." My lawyer was stunned. "Leo, this is an incredible offer. You're leaving millions of dollars for the town on the table." "It's not about the money," I said, echoing my aunt's words. "It's about doing the right thing. My thing. Tell them we will only settle if they agree to a consent decree, a court-enforced agreement that changes their business practices and is a matter of public record." It was a huge gamble. We were pushing our luck. They could have walked away and decided to fight us in court for years. For 2 days, there was silence. I didn't sleep. I just paced the floors of the old farmhouse, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. Then the call came. They had agreed. Their reputation was so damaged that they couldn't afford any more public scrutiny. They signed the consent decree. It was over. We had won. There was a celebration in the town square. It felt surreal. I was no longer the invisible orphan. I was a part of something. I had honored my aunt's legacy. After the legal fees were paid, and they were substantial, there was still over $100,000 left from the money in the footlocker. I used a portion of it to finish the repairs on the house and the barn, hiring local craftsmen to help. I wanted to invest back into the community that had embraced me. I invested the rest, creating a small but stable income for myself. I didn't need to be rich. I had everything I needed. I had a home. I had a purpose. I had a community. I decided to stay in Havenwood. I started a small organic farm on the land, just like my grandparents had done. It was hard work, but it was good work. I was connected to the seasons, to the earth, to the legacy of my family. I never became a famous lawyer or a wealthy businessman. My life was quiet, simple, and deeply meaningful. Sometimes I sit on the porch in that same rocking chair where my journey began. I look out over the fields that are now mine to care for, and I think about my Aunt Sarah. I think about her incredible sacrifice, her quiet strength, and the profound gift she gave me. It wasn't the money, it was the choice. She gave me the chance to choose my own identity, to choose what I stood for. She taught me that the most valuable inheritance isn't something you're given, but a responsibility you choose to accept. And in accepting it, you find out who you really are. They say you can't choose your family, but maybe you can. Maybe family isn't just about blood. Maybe it's about the people you fight for, the legacy you protect, and the community you build. What my aunt left me wasn't just a house and a hidden fortune. She left me a home in every sense of the word. She gave me back my past so I could build a future, and that is a treasure beyond any price. The story doesn't end with a happily ever after, because life isn't a fairy tale. The scars of my childhood are still there. The fight with Stonebridge left its own marks. But the story ends with a new beginning, one built on a solid foundation of truth and purpose. It's a story of hope. What this whole journey taught me is that our past doesn't have to define our future. The labels people put on us, orphan, poor, nobody, they only have power if we let them. We all have the capacity to rewrite our own story, to stand for something even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. What's an inheritance you've received that had nothing to do with money? A lesson, a value, a story from a grandparent, a sense of responsibility? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Reading your stories reminds me that we are all part of a larger human family, connected by our struggles and our hopes. Thank you for being here, for listening. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing. We're building a community here for people who believe in the power of a second chance. Until next time, be well and stand for something.